Well, hello everybody, this is Ian Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to your critique of the week. It's Friday, February 14th. Happy Valentine's Day to everybody out there. We got some special Valentines in the house. Let's see, Rose Leonard is here. We got Patty Arbor, Jerry Stephenson, and guess what? I went through and looked at the oldest poem in the queue, and it was Jerry Stephenson. So we're definitely doing Jerry's first off. Let's see, Patty Arbor's here, Lynn Schilling, Dr. Q, Nikki Fryer, Steve Horrell is here, Dick Westheimer, hey Dick, today's Poet of the Day, also Poet of the Month on Rattle.com. Let's see, Dr. Q is here, Shape of Soup, we got Winston Munn, Brian O'Sullivan, Christiana Doucette, let's see, Hammond Malik is here, Sharon Ferrante, D. Coleman, Nate Jacob, hey Nate, Tom Barlow, hey Tom. Let's see, Katie Dozier right over there. Maria Alberg is here. Cindy Guntherman. Yeah, so great group of poets on hand today over on Facebook. Anybody show up yet? Donna Best is there. Hey, Donna. Thanks for keeping Facebook alive. All right, so as always, this is the Critique of the Week. What we like to do is talk about poems. What works, what doesn't, how to make them better. If anybody would like to submit poems for critique, all you have to do is go to rattle.com/critique. Then you can find the submission portal there. Submit up to 2 poems. We will get to them in the order we received. And at least once a week, we try to do somebody who's a regular participant if we have it. So if you're somebody who participates and helps out here, helps other poets become better as we all become better ourselves, then you move up in the line. And so, if I recognize anybody named as I scroll through, we'll try to get to them like right away, like within a week or two. But otherwise, we're going to go in the order they were received. And this is a response to the way people always ask if I can include some feedback on poems when they're submitted. And I can't provide feedback on poems because we get about 500 poems a day. Something. Is it more than that? Maybe it's 1,000 now? I don't even remember. We get a lot of poems a day, and there's no way to provide feedback on every one. The first read is just a kind of quick, yum yuck, yay or nay, and then we sort of think about a small percentage of the poems actually for publication. And so it's really impossible to give feedback individually, as nice as that would be. I would love to talk to everybody, but here we can. And by doing it publicly like this, everybody can appreciate and enjoy and learn from it. So that's the way we do it around here. So, and let's dig right in. Like I said, I looked at the queue, and I don't know how I missed Jerry. I've seen Jerry there before, but Jerry doesn't, as far as I recollect, Jerry is a regular on the prompt lines, open lines for a long time. Hadn't been around as much lately, so I wasn't thinking of him as a poet who's in the Critique of the Week, but then here he is. So it's great to see again Jerry from up north. And let's take a look. So, Jerry Stephenson from British Columbia. That's where Jerry is. And if you submit poems to the Critique of the Week, there is this little column for general questions. And Jerry had 2 for us. He says, number 1 has a poet's note to explain a few drummer details. And the poem number 2 is just a different genre, looking for guidance and suggestions, you tell me. So those are the 2 notes on the 2 poems that Jerry sent. And the submission is from September 23rd. So we're looking back about 4 or 5 months. Thanks for the patience, Jerry. And we're going to try to go through as many poems as quickly as possible. And then we got to get going because Lizzie is selling some Girl Scout cookies. We got to do a little booth outside. If anybody would like to buy some Girl Scout cookies from Lizzie, if you go to Katie's Facebook page, I know she posted the link. But we're trying to do our part to get those cookies moving, I guess. All right, so let's take a look at these 2 poems that Jerry Stephenson included. And the first poem is this, DJ Fontana Ghosts Me. So that's an interesting title right off the bat from Jerry. DJ Fontana Ghosts Me. All right. Again, I hear it. I know the sound, it's vintage 65 Ludwig drums. Ludwig in my studio. It's DJ, not disc jockey. It's DJ Fontana. He ghosts me. He ghosts this kit. 4 pieces, I know it, assembled in his mind. Now he is being cruel. It's Hayride, it's Heartbreak Hotel. I YouTubed Charlie Watts. I believe DJ ghosted him as well. As well, I hope Charlie will now ghost me. Hey, you, I'm not your cloud yet. And so here's the note that Jerry mentioned too, as he was sending the poem in. Jerry said, poet's note, DJ Fontana was the drummer for Elvis from day one. He is credited with laying down the basics of rock drumming, self-taught yet a huge catalog of work. He inspired his style of rock drumming to a self-taught jazz drummer, Charlie Watts of Rolling Stone fame. So this is an interesting thing to talk about, which we hardly do. So thanks for sharing this, Jerry. But I think the note is really interesting. I want to know who DJ Fontana is. I think that's a really cool thing to know that about the drummer for Elvis and credited with laying down the basics of rock drumming and all that stuff. I think maybe if you're a drummer, you know that. But if you're not a drummer, you don't. And I think those are really interesting details to share in poems. I don't think it's common knowledge. I mean, when you share, and this is a thing that I have trouble with too, I think in poems, I think there's a lot of things that I could, and I think about this all the time, there's a lot of things I could write about, but it sort of bores me a little bit because I know it and I kind of assume other people know the things that I know, but they don't actually. And it's actually really, when you have specialized knowledge in particular, or when you've researched something, it's really nice to share those details. So in this poem, I would love to be told who DJ Fontana is. And I understand this because I hesitate myself because I think, everybody knows that, how that the spectrum of light is refracted or whatever. And then it turns out that, a lot of people don't, and so it's good to share that. And I think there's some kind of fine line you have to walk between, not boring people by sharing things they already know, but knowing what people don't. And I think this is a detail that a lot of people don't know about, and we would love to hear more. And so the poem, and Jerry, I think, knew that it responded to these details. The poem was that we don't know, so we included the note. But I would love to see those details in the poem itself, tell the story of DJ Fontana. And I think that'd be much more engaging. And here it's sort of a reaction as if you know DJ Fontana, which is maybe more interesting to Jerry because it's DJ Fontana is old news to Jerry, but we'd love to hear it. So I think that's my first thought. So figure out who's speaking this to us. And why you're telling it to us, and that include the whole story. And I think the poem would sing even more, and then you can get to the same sort of leaps that you have and the reaction you have too. But set us up, let us know what's going on. And I think the same thing applies a lot of the time to those kind of personal poems we always talk about, where we don't know the context of this romantic relationship that fell apart, or that you're talking to your dead father unless you tell us. It's the same kind of context, even though this is a public knowledge context. We need to know that context to really appreciate the poem, and I think it's great if you could share that. Yeah. As Clayton Clark said, yes, after the note, I needed to reread the poem. Love the ending, nice music throughout. Yeah. Okay, so let's take a closer look at this poem. And DJ Fontana ghosts me. And I do think, for me, I'm not sure what ghosts me. In the parlance, here, Jamie Thomas says, I'd like to know more about why DJ Fontana is important to the poet and why it matters that he's being ghosted by him. And I think, ghost, there's a vernacular kind of, modern colloquialism where ghosting is where you you go on a date with somebody and then you just never call them back and pretend you don't exist. and so you sort of drop off the radar for a relationship. That's what ghosting means. And that was my first thought because that's what people are saying these days. But I think the ghosting in this context and in this story means that the ghost of the drummer is actually there within the drum kit. And so I don't know. So I'd like to see just more of this played out in detail. Anyway, again, and this beginning I think throws me off too. I would cut the again. I would just say again. I hear it. I know the sound. It's vintage '65 Ludwig drums. Ludwig in my studio. It's DJ, not disc jockey. Jockey. It's DJ Fontana. And so I don't really know what the significance of saying DJ is not disc jockey and pointing that out. I guess it's because you assume it's disc jockey. So I guess that makes sense in second thought. It's initials. But he ghosts me. He ghosts this kit. 4 pieces, I know it. Assembled in his mind. Now he is being cruel. Yeah. Interesting. Patty Arbor says, as a former drummer, I looked for beats in each line. That's interesting, too. You might want to think about that. One of the things that's really fascinating about haiku, actually. We talk about how there's not syllables in haiku. What there is a kind of musical beat, actually. It's a timing thing. So we say, haiku's not really 5-7-5. It's actually 7-7-7. And the sevens are actually a time signature, basically. And then there's two missing like silent notes in there. So in Japanese, it's 5 of the 7, 7 of the 7, 5 of the 7 in duration, which is very much different. And I wonder if you could play with kind of stuff like that. There's another fascinating poem that we have coming up, and I can't remember the name of the genre right now off the top of my head. I guess I could pull it up and tell you. But there's a Japanese form of art, which is a slideshow presentation, which is timed to each slide is timed to a certain length. And this was a poem. It's Julie Kane's poem. Let me pull it up. I'm not going to show it. I just want to remember what it's called. Yeah, it's called a Pecha Kucha. That's Pechacucha. Pecha Kucha. And so in this form, I think she said it was 21 slides, and each slide is something like you have exactly 20 seconds. So it ends up being exactly 6 minutes and 30-second presentation, if I have the numbers right. And the whole sort of art is to get your presentation timed perfectly to the slideshow that you don't actually click, which is just a fascinating thing. But I wonder about it's a long side note, but I wonder about playing with something like that with this poem, because it's a drumming poem, and getting some kind of time going on. Yeah. So anyway, so even either beats per line, in the English language, it's a stressed language, so we focus on beats a lot. But if you want to play with like some kind of time like that too, that's interesting as well. Anyway, so not disc jockey, it's DJ Fontana. He ghosts me. He ghosts this kit. 4 pieces I know it assembled in his mind. Now he is being cruel. It's Hayride. It's Heartbreak Hotel. Those are, of course, famous songs. I YouTube Charlie Watts. Someone mentioned that YouTube is spelled wrong. And I would spell it the way, unless there's some reason why spelling it differently. YouTube is capital Y-O-U, capital T-U-B-E. And I would just keep it to the thing like that when you're using cultural references, unless there's a reason not to. And I don't see a reason not to here. Okay. I believe DJ ghosted him as well. I hope Charlie will now ghost me. Hey, you. I'm not on your cloud yet. And so I get to the other poem, and I still don't really understand what ghosted means. And I'm looking at the comments to see if... I like all the references to songs, and I like there's like a idea behind the poem, that connection to the drummer through the drum kit is something that's really interesting, the way that kind of echoes through time. But I don't think the poem is like coming out from the content that we have. So give us more details. I think tell us the story. Maybe tell the poem in the voice of DJ Fontana Ghost in the Kit, or maybe tell us, or if ghosting means, sort of haunted, and like his ghost is there in the chair in the front of the drum kit. Maybe like tell the story of why you would feel that way, like what kind of supernatural events happen with the drum kit. I mean, we just need more. We need more of the story because it's interesting. Yeah, as Amy Dower-Solorzano says, I also first read Ghosts in the modern colloquial way, but I don't think that's the intent, and haunts maybe a little stronger. Yeah, exactly. Maybe something more casual, like hangs around or hovers. Yeah, that's a good idea too. Yeah. Let's see. Morgan Fee says, I don't know that capitalization is enough to get readers to understand that some of these words are references to songs for readers who don't know these songs already, at least. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, to me, it's pretty clear that they're songs, but, I have this sort of basket of cultural references, and Hayride and Heartbreak Hotel are very, very familiar to me, even it was, it's before my era. Hey, you get off my cloud, the Stones. So, I don't know. I think this is an interesting idea to play more with and reveal more about. I think let's see. Dick Westheimer says this feels like the poet is showing his domain-specific knowledge rather than it being what stimulates the poet to explore new territory. Yeah, and I guess that's a great point. So, share this with us, share the story with us, and then figure out why you wanted to write about it in the process of writing. And that's always kind of the goal and how poetry should function when it's functioning in the maximum capacity. And as Jamie Thomas says, there's something I like about this, but I could use a lot more clarity and connection through some story details. So that's another way to put it. So we're all kind of saying the same thing. Really interesting sort of heart underneath this poem, something to play with, but don't hold back. Tell us what it's all about. Okay, let's look at the next poem. Let me refresh the page. There it goes. Okay. Submittable does that sometimes. Okay. So for Critique of the Week, back then, this is Jerry Stephenson. F.U. First Foraging Forward. Interesting. Fall fell flat on its face this flaunt season. For faulting, it would fairly verge on frivolity, forego a flatulate of forgiving flatulence, folly at fumbling fortitude at foreclosure, to a summer of a frightful faith. Furthermore, would be fragrantly fluffy, my forgiveness for effing flipping brevity. So that's interesting. F.U. First Foraging Forward. And this brings up another thing. We had I don't think was it a prompt at one point, but I think it was when Marianne Corbett, am I right? Is that right? When she was a guest in the Rattlecast, she talked about, and she had these alliterative verse poems, and we had a prompt based on alliterative verse. And with alliterative verse, you have a meter, but then you have three alliterations per line. It's 3 over 4, so it's 4 beats and 3 alliterations is how you do the alliterative verse line. And we can pull it up. There's a really cool website. It's called like Restoring Ground or something like that. Yeah, ground. Alliterative verse. It's like Forgotten Ground. Forgotten Ground Regained. That's the website. And you find that at alliteration.net. And for this, I would suggest, I think it's really fun to play with the alliteration like you are. I would suggest trying to put it in the alliterative form. I'm trying to find a list, like a sample of a poem. Let's see. I know he's got tons on here. But if you want to learn more about alliterative verse, go to this website. It's called, once again, Forgotten Ground Gained at alliteration.net. And let's see. There we go. It's actually a literary magazine. And this guy, I can't remember the name of the poet who's doing it. But this is the verse of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, among other things. There's calls for submissions out here. Here's a Marianne Corbett poem, since we mentioned her. And this is the feel of it. In the nodding midday, a murder of crows, so loud they haul you from a lulled house, where news of war nests in the walls. You stare at the end of the street where they roost. So it's a little less, but you get that. See that alliteration that comes through. Take a look at another random one. This is let's go to Rose Novick. Well, it's not there. Anyway, but so try out this alliterative verse, I would say, because we're definitely having fun playing with it, but because there's no structure, it's kind of like tennis without a net thing going on, where we're throwing as much alliteration as possible, and it just sort of feels a little overwhelming. But I think if you pull it back and sort of focus on the storytelling a little again and give us more. I mean, I know Jerry loves to write little short poems, but we need to be told a story in that poem. We need something to connect with. And I think we get a little lost, but the play is really fun. So fell flat on its face this flaunt season. I like that. For faulting, it would fairly verge on frivolity, foregoing a flatulate of forgiving flatulence. See, this gets a little bit of a Dr. Seuss, but from the other side or something. Like it's a little bit much to get out. The seashells by the seashore, Yeah. Winston Munn says, I think it needs to be playing off a well-known poem to work. That's a good suggestion, too, if you're doing this to, yeah. JB says, I wonder if that's JB pen name, I'm not sure, says it might be fun to play off the U in the title and alternate between F alliteration and U alliteration. Another thing that I can point to if you want to play with alliteration is, let me pull this up too. This is one of my favorite books. I think this is the best post 9/11 poem that sort of captured that era. And it's Bethia Harvey, The Future of Terror. And it's this long poem where she goes through the dictionary, kind of. She literally tries to cram, she just opens up the dictionary. It's her writing process and sort of lets these sort of feelings of the mood of post 9/11 world run through her poem. And she ends up with this. So we can look at this as a fun thing. This is a alliterative verse has that form. It's that 4/3 structure. This is a lot more free verse use of alliteration. And here, this is Bethia Harvey's The Future of Terror, and it is wonderful. The Generalissimo's glance directed him to and fro. Geronimo, said the uber goon we called God, and we were off to the races. Never mind that we could only grow gray things, that inspecting the horse's gums in the gymnasium predicted a jagged road ahead. We were tired of hard news. It helped to turn down the hearing aids. We could already all do impeccable imitations of the idiot, his incessant incisors working on a stake as he said, there's an intimacy to invasion. That much was true. So anyway, this is just a wonderful, another example of what you can do with alliterative verse, or alliterative free verse in this case. So maybe check Bethia Harvey out too as well. All right, so those are sort of my thoughts on that. Yeah. Jamie Thomas about that poem, once again, says, I'll put it up on screen for a second too. Jamie says, fabulous focused effort, fun, fresh, filled with flair, but needs to find its footing. And so I agree. I think that's sort of what we need here is a little bit more footing, a little more detail, a little more context. And one of the reasons why we ask you to do multiple poems for the critique of the week is so that we can see if there's a trend. And since we know Jerry, of course, we sort of know the trend anyway, but Jerry likes to he has a lot of playfulness in his poems, and he has a little really tight, concise poems, but the danger is not letting us into the story. And so adding the story is really the what would help, like letting us know, what you're thinking about as you approach the poem. It's sort of like, it feels like you have the thoughts, and then you're playing with the thoughts, but we don't know the original thoughts, and so we can't really play along with you. And the key, I think, is to give us the thoughts too as you're playing. And I think that'll really help with your poems, Jerry, or come across for the audience. All right. Okay, so let's move on. But thanks for sharing that, Jerry. And Jerry is one of my favorite people. I love his enthusiasm. I miss him on the open lines. It was fun hearing his positivity all the time. All right, let's go next to waiting for submittable to load. Writing my dissertation. Okay. After Frank O'Hara, this poet is Rondalyn Whitney from Massachusetts. And we have some interesting use of things here. So let me see if there's any commentary. Any questions? How to write to poets, read the news, and follow in the shadow of another poem successfully. Well, that's an interesting thought. Well, maybe we'll talk about that. Writing my dissertation. Okay. And so this is a longer poem. And interestingly, I'm not sure. See, you never really know if this is intentional or just some kind of quirk of submittable and files being transferred. It's a docx, so it's probably copied right. But we have one font here. And then we have another font here, which switches to a sans serif font. Well, I guess they're both sans serif, but it switches to Courier New, and then it goes back here. So I'm not sure if that's intentional. It's always interesting. But let's see. There's a lot of playfulness going on here, too. So this is, you see the footnotes coming up, too. There's some really interesting poems. Look up Musca Humana by Christine Hume is a really interesting book that has a lot of fun play with footnotes, and other things do, of course. There's Sappho. There are a lot of people that play with footnotes with Sappho because there's so much missing. Anyway, let's see. Writing my dissertation after Frank O'Hara. I'm not a scholarly writer. I'm a poet. Why? I think I would rather be a scholar, but I'm not yet. I am in training, learning how to think as a researcher will, to pause not for the juiciest, most evocative word, but instead the most succinct way to synthesize findings and p-values that have been hammered into synthesis before. Well, for instance, Dr. Kara has studied and published on attachment. She is responding to a request for proposals, a formal document with citations and an abstract. She listens to my research aspirations, offers me a book on cherishment, encourages me to read it and consider it deeply. I am formulating my research questions, crafting my own proposals defense. I get lost. The poetic text of Bruhl and Bethelard, Jung's protégés, and centralizing elements of narrative in a mother's view of her child. I drop in to see Kara. Sit down, have tea, she says. I drink, we drink. She rewarms her constant comment. I look up. You have attachment in your proposal for the day-long workshop. Yes, I need it. Needed something there to address mental health. Oh, I go to the quarters, and the quarters go by, and I drop in again. The workshop has turned to a poster. Is going on, and I go, and the days go by. I drop in, the poster is finished. Where is attachment? All that's left is a background of Cassette's work of a mother softly holding her child. The title reads Mothering Occupations. Where is attachment, I ask. It was too much, Dr. Kara says. But me, one day I am thinking of cherishment, the importance of attaching to a child, of cherishing that child. A child who is difficult and who behaves in a way that embarrasses, torments, sequesters a mother in isolated social censure. I declare my topic to my committee, attachment and with autism and ADHD, no. Attachment, motherhood, and non-engaging behaviors, no. Journal writing for mothers, attachment, stress, and non-engaging behaviors, I have far to go. I write a line about attachment. Pretty soon it is a 100-page document. Line after line of my thoughts, cited works. I buy more ink for the HP PhotoSmart all-in-one printer. Other lines come and form into chapters about social isolation, about stress, coping, emotional disclosure. I write there needs to be more about coping. I write about journaling as a form of disclosure. I grow hypervigilant to not disclose. I confess researcher bias in the proper section. I self-direct and think how I cherish words. There should be more in this section, not about how challenging mothering or provocative words, but of standard deviations and linear regressions. I spend a day excising. Days go by. Another quarter goes by. I write, I edit, I cry. Tuition is due. Work is due. My child wants to snuggle. I write, I snuggle. I clean up the mess. I assure all medications are taken to calm the boy, the first of his new, God let it work this time, school. I'm a real poet, and here I must breathe in breath and breath on the ember of a researcher's mind. I write a mother-child systems, the interplay between mother and child, of love, of angst, the loneliness. No, the literature only supports the term isolation. I edit the text, make the change. My chapter is done, and I haven't mentioned cherishment, not once. I have learned to cherish the boy who needs a snuggle. How far does this go? Okay, sorry. The energy that grows erratic when concerta fails and there is a breakout of non-engaging behaviors up till 12 accidental breaks of another precious toy, but I love his heart and he loves me with two hearts. My abstract is finished, and there is no sign of cherishment. I complete chapters 1 through 3, but all but the analysis. There is no cherishment. I open a separate file. I write about cherishing my child, cherishing words, the exhilaration of linguistic bliss of mothering. I title the article Cherishment of Writing. Close it, let it go, return to my table of variables, lured by the nymph-like song which hauntingly pulls me to the inevitable crash of the unforgiving edges of SPSS. And one day I receive announcement for a workshop addressed to me with my newly awarded honorific doctor, the initials PhD typed cleanly in bold font following my name. I see Dr. Kara's book will be featured at this year's proceedings, honoring the occupational therapist Diane Fossier, the central coherence of her work as a primatologist. The book is titled Attachment. Yeah. So I agree. Jamie Thomas says such an interesting topic, but it's trying to do way too much in one piece. That's my journal. It's a very long read and doesn't, it's fascinating, the topic. What I love most is the repetition of attachment there. I think that's really interesting, the way that does. I like the attempt at the at the dry voice. So Bethany Journal says I think it's more essay-like than poem-like, and I like that concept. I like that there's a voice that's sort of dry and essay-like, but it's still too far from poetry, I think, to make it work, to sustain us in sort of the music of that voice. There's some great, little poems that do this with voice. But I think it's a tough thing to sustain without new things added. But I think if you could condense this to like a one-page poem-ish, maybe 1.5, like cut it in half, and make sure you focus on where our attention was being held and where it wasn't. And I think where you move through that attachment stuff, that's really engaging. Yeah, as Shiva says, there is poetry there, just not enough, I think. Yeah, it's just not enough to sustain it. Let me read you one quick poem which does the kind of thing with voice like this. There's a lot of examples of this, but this is Mike White from Rattle. It's issue 33. I can't remember the title of the poem, but the freshman essay in a new verse translation. So this is a slightly different thing, but see how he plays with this essay language. And here you go. This is Mike White, one of our favorite poets, of course, reading the freshman essay in a new verse translation. And this is, the freshman essay. So it's different, but I think if you condense, I'm only talking about voice, but you can condense that research, hyper-analytic kind of dry voice into something that's sort of interesting and playful with that to make it work. So listen to how he does that with this. And this is a freshman, so he's sort of playing with a different aspect of it, but still feel how the voice works and makes poetry out of something that shouldn't be poetry, okay? The freshman essay in a new verse translation. The question one will argue in this essay is, what is a cannibal? You are so wrong if you said a kind of animal. Fact, they are not like a dark stranger. Fact, they are much in danger. Maybe you think just because you are you would not do what they do. Well, think again, civilized man and or woman. Plane crash must eat frozen dead co-pilot proves ordinary people can. Let us now consider the state of nature, a spot of time when toil-free work and whoremongering made life richer. Another point is what is so gross anyway about people meat. When one went to Chinatown one time and saw chicken feet. In conclusion, we are too full of ourselves here in the West. Can you let me know if the last day to drop this class has passed? So, a very fun poem. That was from our humor issue. But that is the freshman essay in a new verse translation. And so you see, he took that voice and maybe like the length of content that was here in the poem we just looked at, but condensed it down to one page. Also made it, even though you don't really hear because it's so distant, it is rhyming couplets, even though there's like no meter whatsoever and it's focused on that student voice. So you kind of don't hear the rhymes. But, stranger danger, you do, woman can, nature, richer, meat feet, so the whole thing is rhyming couplets too, as a new verse translation. So you can do a lot with this kind of voice, but you have to be able to sustain it. And I think I like, somebody said earlier, this is a really ambitious process or project. And I completely agree. It's a great, it's a great thing to be working on. I love playing with that voice of the dissertation. And there's just a lot there that could be turned into really interesting, fun poetry. And also, we didn't really mention, but the topic itself, the attachment and all the things that have to do with that are interesting too, and how that corresponds to Frank O'Hara. I didn't read the note because I was so after the poem Frank O'Hara, Why I'm Not a Painter, from the collected poems of Frank O'Hara, and so yeah, and so I don't know. There's something really interesting about using. I assume it's a dissertation on O'Hara on that poem. Which it then plays with that. And I think, there's just a lot here that's really interesting, but it goes on too long and doesn't sustain itself. And so playing with that voice and really focusing on the voice, because poetry is the music of speech. And so the voice is really the central thing to what's important. I think there's a poem here. We just gotta carve it down and make it a lot shorter. Okay. Yeah. Brandon Sullivan says, this is great. The the Mike White. But to really sound like a freshman essay, it needs the degraded three-pronged thesis. Since the beginning of time, cannibals have killed people, eaten people, and gotten upset stomachs. Yeah. Yeah. And as Morgan Fee says, I wonder if the poet here would do better with a challenge set by keeping a form, a guzzle, a sonnet, something that forces them to condense. Yeah, I think definitely so. Like the couplets that Mike White was using there. It doesn't have to be that, but something that keep a poetic structure within this voice is really key. I like to think of writing just in general as a kind of energy with like a frame to it. I mean, like if you have an instrument, you blow into it, and then you have the notes of a clarinet or something based on the structure and the shape. And so you sort of need like a structure shape, and you need that energy, that breath. And I think it really helps to have some kind of structure if you're making poems in that way. It doesn't have to be anything in particular, but this is sort of so free-flowing that it loses itself in the original voice rather than structuring containing the voice it's becoming. Kimberly Gibson Tran says, the juxtaposition of formal poetry structure and plain speech lines is great in Tim's example. What this poem could try is using more poetic language in the form of dissertation conventions. Yeah, that too. I think there's a great poem here. And so that's why I wanted to talk about it at that level, because I think there is something really interesting here. Okay, let's take a look at the other one, and we'll see if it's shorter. Oh, submittable. Why do you do this to me? Refreshing. I don't know. Okay. Yeah, this is a little shorter, so we're good to go. Man of the Hole. And let's see. This is less experimental, I think, just glancing at it. So we'll see. Man of the Hole. Man of the Hole, named for the Man of the Hole, named for digging 9-foot-long holes, removing dirt from the earth. His purposefulness had purpose unknown to any who observed holes. But give him his name, the Man of the Hole. Was he hiding from those who invaded, slaughtered all but him? Was he performing a ritual known only to him, to a god? Was he creating an incantation, invocation? Was he hoping for those lost to return? Was he? He lived alone for 3 decades. He lived alone. He learned to hunt for food. He collected the feathers of what he ate for 3 decades. He learned to grow kale and carrots and fruits. He must have had favorites. He must have had memories of another. He must have loved once. He must have had memories biting into the pulpy sweetness of fruit, of grain. He willingly lay down in his hammock, willing death to come. He covered himself in feathers of all colors, willing, I think, to touch what it was lost. Willing. Feathers covered his body. He must have covered himself with feathers, colorful gathering, purposefully placed plumage feathers, his body calling out, come here. In the end, it was the feathers that drew death near enough to cross the hole. Feathers were his final treasures. Feathers. Imagine that. So this is more condensed into poetry, has a similar type voice. So I think playing with voice is something that really feels central to this poet. And again, the poet is Rondalyn Whitney from Massachusetts. I think playing with voice is sort of central to what Rondalyn is doing. And so I think pushing that and playing with voice, like that Mike White poem, I think it's a great example of ways to play with it. Somebody brought up already, let's see, Elizabeth Brown says, I'm not sure the line breaks work. And I agree with that too. I like the sort of strangeness of it. There's sort of a, James Tate kind of absurdity quality, the Man of the Hole, named for digging 9-foot-long holes, and the story that comes out. And then it goes somewhere even stranger, believe it or not. Winston Munn says, I found this engaging. I do. I find the story engaging. The play with the voice. Again, I think there's something there. This is closer to what the target should be, I think, than the other poem as far as the voice goes. But still a little bit, Clayton Clark says, like the play. Yeah. When someone says, like the enjambment, throwing emphasis on the end words. Yeah. Yeah, and Riley Rowan says, like the voice is very idiomatic. Yeah, so I think it goes a little, again, condensing more would be helpful, but I think this is much closer to the mark. One thing I would do is not, let's read this poem line by line a little bit more. So Men of the Hole is the title. I would just make this the title and not repeat it, because that lose the strength of it a little bit. So just Men of the Hole, or The Man of the Hole. named for digging 9-foot-long holes, removing dirt from the earth, his purposefulness. And, I forgot, I got on my train of thought. The line breaks, I do like the sort of stilted way that the line breaks are playing with the voice, but they're a little too irregular and sort of odd in a way that it becomes a little too stilted. It becomes a little too trippy. And I think toning that down a little, getting more regular and following a little bit more of natural places to break the lines would help. Yeah. So I would do sort of less of these really long and really short and in the breaks too. It's interesting where the he comes in. But anyway, I think the line break should help the poem. It's one of the things poetry. The poem on a page is a kind of sheet music that helps us read. And if you want it to be sort of a staccato reading, there's ways you can do that. But they should, no matter what you're doing, it should be helpful to the act of reading and not a hindrance to performing the poem orally. Because even if we're reading it silently to ourselves, and it's one of the strange things about the way human anatomy works, but we do move our muscles in the same way as if we're speaking them. We have, it's actually the wiring signals are going from our brain to our muscles in our mouth to make the shapes of the sounds, and then we just have them inhibited. So they're like that circuit's turned off, so it doesn't actually get to your muscle when you're reading to yourself, but you're still having the same sort of feeling of reading out loud while you're reading silently. And so having this sort of, even if you're not meant to perform the poem like that, you still trip over things while you're reading if they don't have that musical flow. And it make if the line breaks and the details and the syntax make the poem difficult to read out loud, it's difficult to read internally too. Is the point. So we do want to have a little bit more flow with the line breaks. And I think, we have there, we'll talk about it a little more. I'll read the poem one more time. Anyway, we'll start. But give him his name, the man of the whole. Was he, and I see, we have it turns into this list, but it ends up a little bit difficult to read. Yeah. Yeah, as Winston Munn says, William Carlos Williams used line breaks to change emphasis in his later poetry. Yeah, that's something he was playing with a lot and something that's worth playing with, too. Anyway, was he hiding from those who invaded, slaughtered all but him? Was he performing a ritual only to him, to a god? This line, I think, feels only to him, to a god, doesn't feel right. Something just feels like a typo there. Was he creating an incantation, invitation, invocation? Was he hoping for those lost to return? Was he? Yeah. Desi Cochran asks a good question. And I think this is a really important one. Desi says, in general, what makes lists work versus not work? And this really is, it's a list with really strange line breaks, that shift the emphasis. And like someone said, makes you, I think it was, Amy Dower-Slorzno says, I enjoy oh no, that's a different comment. But somebody said that it's like it sort of forces the repeating of the questioning of the was he stronger. And I think that's true. It might work with different, with more breaks to slow you down more so it didn't feel as like rushed and choppy. But it is otherwise a list poem. And what makes lists work is the same thing as what makes anything work. I think it's just a little bit more stark within poetry. But it's the setting up of expectation and then the subversion of expectation that makes list poems work, because we're pattern recognition machines. That's how human beings operate. We love to look for patterns, and then we love to see the pattern being slightly broken so we can adjust. It's like, oh, we're 80% right there. Let's tweak the pattern. Let's tweak our interpretation of that. And that's actually the main drive that makes us like to learn, which makes us as smart as we are as an animal. And so if you're going to have a list poem, it's really playing with that. It's playing with setting up expectation, then slightly subverting expectation, then returning to that expectation, over and over again. And it's what makes, what makes meter and rhyme work. What makes, when meter becomes sing-songy, it's too predictable. We don't have enough patterns broken, and that's what we're drawn to. And a list is really no different. And so you want to have a list where you can sort of see it coming, but then it surprises you still. And that we get pleasure out of. And that's that learning process, that dopaminergic drive to learn that we're playing with and stimulating when we're reading a poem like that. And so you want to have elements that repeat and have a kind of rhythm that repeats. But then you also want to have little variations on that. So, okay. Yeah, so Morgan P says, who is the speaker asking all these questions? An anthropologist. Yeah, that's a good question. All right, let's keep reading. Yeah, was he lived alone for 3 decades. He lived alone. So the repetition here doesn't add anything. And so I would cut this part. He lived alone for 3 decades. He learned to hunt food. He collected the feathers of what he ate for 3 decades. He learned to grow kale and carrots and fruit. He must have had favorites. So I get a little bit lost in the story here. The man with the hole, he's digging these 9-foot-long holes. But that seems sort of not relevant to the fact that he's living alone and growing food. I think there's like a little bit of a missing connection there. Why he's like the holes don't really affect whether he's living alone or hunting for food or things like that. So there's like a leap in sort of logic of what matters in the poem there. Anyway, he lived alone for 3 decades. He lived alone. He learned to hunt for food. He collected the feathers of what he ate for 3 decades. He learned to grow kale and carrots and fruits. He must have had favorites. He must have had memories of another. He must have loved once. He must have had memories biting into the pulpy sweetness of fruit. See, I think when you talk about how lists work, here's a good example of how it does work. He must have, and there's little short bits. He must have had favorites. He must have had memories of another. He must have loved once. He must have had memories biting into the pulpy sweetness of fruit. And so we set up this expectation of these short lists. We varied it slightly with the second one. Another was a little longer. We went back to the short, and then we went really long. And that really long, the detail of that really stands out in a pleasurable way. And it's because we set up the expectation of how the list was going to be, then we slightly changed it. And so that's how a list works and effectively in a poem. That's how list poems work. If you look, style of poetry, there's some pretty, well-published and stuff list poems, and they have to have that variation within the list to make it music. And that's a good example of it. Yeah. Kimberly Gibson Tran says, this is an interesting dude. I want to be able to picture more pulpy sweetness of fruit. Yeah, exactly. I agree. Anyway, I think this is one of my favorite runs right here. He willingly lay down in his hammock, willing death to come. He covered himself in feathers, all of all colors, willing to think, to touch what was lost, willing. So I think, to me, these, and I'm not sure if there's something, intentionally that's like a callback to something, but the way that he right here and willing right here are their own sentences, it feels like forcing that repetition and that broken rhythm too strongly. It's like a lot of will from the poet coming out, and it breaks up the natural feel of the voice. So I would avoid doing this willing in the he. It's sort of it's too self-referential to maintain the feel of the poem. I think it breaks the fourth wall in a way that's not gaining anything and just losing some of the energy that the poem has built up. So I would cut the willings in the he that are their own isolated thing. Anyway, willing, feathers covered his body. He must have covered himself with feathers. Colorful, gathering purposefully placed plumage feathers. So I like the details here, but I'm not sure how it all connects. His body calling out, come here. I like that too. In the end, it was the feathers that drew death near enough to cross the hole. Feathers were his final treasures. Feathers, imagine that. I just don't know what to make of it. Yeah. Kimberly Gibson Tran says, I want to see the hammock, the feathers better. Yeah, I don't know. So I think, a little too forceful with play, and tell us a little more. The connection there is a little bit off to me. It sort of leaps too far for me to follow. Like it's sort of like, I'm like jumping, like it's parkour or something. You're jumping from rooftop to rooftop, and you can leap a little bit farther than I can. And so the third jump in, I like jump from one roof to another and miss and fall to my death. I don't know. It's just a little bit too much to try to connect it all, even though I like the strangeness of it. Rose Leonard really likes it. I like a lot. I like a lot of both these poems. I think they just need to be tightened up and shown a little bit more too. Like tell us a little bit more to help us make the connections a little bit more. See, Wayne the Poet says, is he a grave digger? And I don't think so. Winston Munn says, I don't know what the feathers mean, but I find I don't care that I don't know. And that's interesting too. I mean, some poems do that I don't know what they mean and I don't really care. I mean, I could pull up examples. We've done a lot of examples already today. But I don't know, to me, it doesn't get quite to that level. I love it when a poem rises to that level where there's so much music and there's so much strangeness and interesting detail that I can't really put the pieces together, but I do love the poem anyway. And I think that can happen. For me, I think it isn't condensed enough. It doesn't have quite enough music for that to live. I think I'll pick a short example. Hang on, let me pick a short example. We'll do Tamaz Salamoon. Okay. And this is an untitled poem too, so this gives you nothing to work on. This is Tamaz Salamoon, just a wonderful poet from Eastern Europe, and translated by Afsani Krivanya. And this is Tamaz Salamoon. Anyone who falls into an Arabic night should know that laws there are ruthless and brutal. At first one hears tingle-tangle from the high stone walls. Someone drops a rope with a basket. Leave the dates alone. Don't eat them. That's how they stop drovers. If the rope is strong enough, allow yourself to be pulled up. For 3 days I was smiling and bowing and was just about to eat the rugs when God caught me naked. So I have no idea what that's really about. Like, you get these flashes of what it's about, but it's so condensed and tight, and the images are so precise and unusual and interesting that it just makes you want to reread the poem. And I think when you can get at the strangeness and the provocative evocativeness that dense, then that makes the poem really work. But I think it doesn't get up to that level. Another one I really love, and I'll just put this up really quick. It's one of my favorite poems we ever published. Is John Kulisako's The Preakness. And this does something kind of similar, but in a longer way. And this is the way memory comes through in this poem. This is The Preakness. Jesus wasn't going to make it. Jim kept coughing and crying on the floor next to the blue crib, the longest hair on the backs of the girls. None of it came back. A moth came back, and the noise, it wasn't possible. The garden wouldn't turn around and show its face. It wouldn't open. Yes, the black and white story lady music teacher tells about a phantom. I listened to it. I found out you could die with your eyes open. I went with E and D upstairs, and we played Die with Your Eyes Open in the room with a sandpaper door, like doctors flying around, one having more sadness than the other one, listening. And it goes on like that. And it doesn't really reveal itself, but the narrative is so compelling that it doesn't really matter how to fit it together, you know? And I think that you could go for that in a poem like this, but we need that condensed amount of interest, you know? So anyway, that was another poem. That's John Kulisako's The Preakness. Go look up the whole thing if you would like. But and so this has the possibility of that, but we need to condense it and have that intensity. And I think it would work, you know? So that's one direction to go, or connect the dots a little bit more so we can see what you were thinking too. That's another direction to go. Okay, let's move on to another poem. We took our time. They're interesting poems today, so we've spent some time on them. Let's do another couple. That was Rondalyn Whitney from Massachusetts. Next in line is... Maria Alberg says that this example has nice rhythm. And that's a good point, too. Like, it needs the music, too. I mean, the voice can carry you. The image and detail can carry you. to a place where the meaning is like just beyond your reach and it's pleasurable. And really, those are my favorite kind of poems. It's hard to get there. John Ashbery does it all the time. I love the Tennis Court Oath. I love some other Ashbery. There are a lot of poets that can do that, but it's a difficult thing to do, to hold your interest when you don't really know how to piece things together. So definitely something worth playing with. Okay, next poet in line is Simran Johal from Edinburgh, Scotland. The poem, we have 2 poems here, Peel Orange and To Fame I Am Famous. Interesting title. Question, what are some tailored techniques that a writer can consider for different length poems? I have attached one extremely long one and another that's much shorter, and wonder how I can prove both considering their different lengths. Well, let me see. I want to see how very long it is, because we don't have tons of time. Very long. Yeah, I'm going to save this for next week. This is interesting. Let's save this Peel Orange for next week. Let's move on to another poet. Instead, that doesn't have is long, but it's an interesting question and looked like interesting poems there. So looking forward to going back to those. Let's see this. Yeah, I want to do some short ones we can just fire through. We'll skip the next one too. Sorry for everybody. Okay, because I just want to get caught up. So we're doing like within a month would be nice. Here's a poet from Poland, Anika Chowdhury. And here we go with this. No general questions. Poem is Look Like the Moon is the title. Here we go. Take a look. Look like the moon. Love comes softly. It doesn't knock, doesn't speak. It arrives like a gentle breeze, quiet and sweet. It doesn't come when you're waiting, but when you're not aware, with someone unexpected, at a time you can't prepare. You aren't ready to hold it. Your heart feels unsure, like the moon, far and untouchable, yet shining, so pure. You wish you could grasp it, but it stays out of reach, a light so beautiful. Only its glow you can keep. From a distance, you see it, the love you can't hold tight, like the moon's gentle beauty that shines through the night. Yeah. So, let's see, where's Drew French? Yeah, Drew French says, can you just submit a poem for critique? Yep. Just on our submittable page, Critique of the Week is a category, and feel free to submit. We'll talk about them and try to help and see what we can do. So this one is interesting. I like the voice in it. There aren't a lot of details and a lot of specificity. It ends up being written toward the rhymes in the last line of each stanza very often. But if you could play with a little more variety and a little more detail, I think this poem, as Morgan Feeney says, this has a nice feeling. Like the Corinthians reading for weddings, maybe a bit condensed and more consistent rhyme scheme and meter. Yeah. So I think this is worth playing with in that level. Those are the things I'd work. Yeah, Jamie Thomas puts it this way. This is tough because it has a nice rhythm, but it feels a little predictable. Yeah, and you want to surprise us a little more. We talked about that, the thing about really all poetry is being that setup. We understand, we think we recognize a pattern, and then you break it a little bit and surprise us. And I think this doesn't have enough surprising, but it's nicely written. Yeah, as Rose Leonard said, it feels like it was written for a greeting card. And so it's really, we set up our skills as writers and poets to play that music of speech, to go somewhere transformative, to find something surprising that our subconscious wanted to talk about, that drew us somewhere new that we hadn't really articulated before. That's the whole real reason of art, Art is calling forth something that hasn't yet been articulated, whether it's a dance move or whether it's a painting or a sculpture or a poem. It's always calling forth some thing that's there, some kind of emotion that we feel that we haven't put a label on, that we haven't said how it is yet. And this, it starts out nicely. It doesn't push deeper into that. And how you push deeper into that is by being specific and letting yourself say surprising things that you don't expect. And the problem nowadays why people tend not to like rhyming poetry is because it ends up being predictable. We want to push back that prediction. And yeah. I'm looking at the question. Let's see. Shape of Soup. Yeah, Shape of Soup says it's a little bland, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. And then Rose Leonard says, how is bland not a bad thing. A genuine question, yeah. And I think that's sort of what gets at the heart of what I was just talking about, is that pushing deeper into what it means to be human, what we know and what we understand. That's really the whole purpose of art. Shiva Soup says sometimes it can elicit a specific vibe. And yeah, but if it elicits a vibe that you know what the vibe is already, then it doesn't really serve any purpose. It's not memorable. It doesn't add to how we understand things. And I think this does. I like the vibe of this poem. It's a good way to put it. But it doesn't make, it keeps being predictable over and over again. It sort of maintains that vibe without surprising us. I think that's the issue here. So let's take a little closer look. Love comes softly. It doesn't knock, doesn't speak. It arrives like a gentle breeze, quiet and sweet. I think that's a nice setup. The quiet and sweet is sort of vague. We could, think of something more interesting there. Something with precise detail, a little more concrete imagery. But I like the rhythm of it. It doesn't come when you're waiting, but when you're not aware, with someone unexpected, at a time you can't prepare. And now here, I think this is the first example. What we don't want to do with rhymes is go, and I've said this before a lot, but don't go with the first rhyme that comes to your mind, because that's the one that's really predictable and sort of guiding yourself there. You want to move to surprising rhymes that surprise both the reader but yourself first and foremost. And when you say in this context, when you're not aware, the first thing that I think of is prepare. And I predict that rhyme coming, and then the poem ends up being less interesting because of that. We want to have the rhyme to be a way to push you into that deeper, you didn't really know what you were thinking, but now you do. Lisa Seidenberg said this poet needs to be exposed to more poetry. And yeah, I agree. It's that sense of being pushed beyond what you expect, which is maybe the theme for today, because we talked about it before. But instead of going for that easy rhyme, go for something surprising that you don't quite know. It's nice to set up a line like this, but when you're not aware, open up a rhyming dictionary, go to something that is completely unexpected, and try to see how you can work that in there. And have that be the challenge to push you into new directions with your thoughts. Because really, the problem with this is it goes around in the same circle over and over again. Even though it's had a nice rhythm to it, it doesn't push into some new place. It doesn't have any movement. It sort of repeats itself. It doesn't come when you're waiting, but when you're not aware, with someone unexpected. At the time, you can't prepare. You aren't ready to hold it. Your heart feels unsure, like the moon, far and untouchable, yet shining so pure. I think I like the moon, far and untouchable. That's nice. And the poem comes to life a little bit there because it's an actual concrete detail. Even though the moon is something poets talk about probably too much, no more poems about the moon, blah, blah, blah. But it still conjures something a little bit more than the more vague and abstract concepts like quiet and sweet. So note that. Yet shining so pure. And so we have unsure and then pure. And again, that's a predictable sort of generality, and it's not pushing the poem into new ground. It's sort of recovering the old ground it already covered. You wish you could grasp it, but it stays out of reach. A light so beautiful, only its glow you can keep. And I do like, you wish you could grasp it, but it stays out of reach. So this is a nice little riff about the moon. There might be its own little micro poem there. I think this is the highlight of the poem. Is this part about the moon being untouchable? Because that's an extended metaphor for the love that we're talking about. And it's a good example of how, we sort of spontaneously generate interesting metaphors when we start going with concrete, specific language. So when you talk about the moon in specific detail, then we come up with this metaphor that feels a little more deep and interesting than the rest of the poem that has a generality you could easily paraphrase. I hope that makes sense. Anyway, yet you wish you could grasp it, but it stays out of reach. A light so beautiful, only its glow you can keep. From a distance, you see it, the love you can't hold tight. And again, here we lost, someone said they wish you could be more consistent with the meter. And there was a really sort of a loose ballad form going on. Or maybe, I guess it's not really ballad, it's limerick type form where it's 4 than 3. And this has a little too many beats. The love you can't hold tight. That hold tight is just the meters off there. Even if it's really, really loose, it's still too much. Like the moon's gentle beauty that shines through the night. And again, with tight night is another first rhyme is not interesting. So yeah. Yeah, let me see some other comments, and we'll just move on. Yeah, Dick Westheimer says too, start with 92%ers on Rhyme Zone, then look for a 92% to that one. Yeah, so go farther. And he's talking about if you go to Rhyme Zone, it shows how near the rhymes are. And you don't want perfect true rhymes because those tend to be boring. That's why if you look at the contemporary verse poets that are writing in verse, a whole, A. Stallings, A.M. Jester, Rena Espaillat, just so many. Molly Peacock, who's been a guest recently on the Rattlecast, other poets like that. It's how far you can push the slants and be surprising with the rhymes, where the play really is and where the excitement of language is pushed forward. And that's what we want to sort of focus on. If we're going to write rhyme, we want to have surprising, unusual things, rhyming across parts of speech, rhyme nouns with verbs, rhyme adjectives with nouns, stuff like that. And then make them things that you wouldn't expect. And there's a pleasure in that. Okay, so let's take a look at another poem. One more. We'll do one more before we go. Again, that was Anika Chowdhury from Poland. Next up is we had Anika again. Let's do someone else. Oh, Anika sent a bunch. That's okay. This is Jessica Little Elk, another short poem here. I am new to publishing my work anywhere. Be gentle. Okay, well, thanks for saying that little warning. This is Jessica Little Elk from Phoenix, Arizona. And the title is Complete Me is the title. And here we go with a poem. Complete Me. In the eve of contrition, I found myself in the eye of the storm. I still rebelled in conflict and chaos. I could never leave in the pain that held me, held no need to grieve in foggy confusion. I became enlightened. And when love called, I was not silent. Every moment with you, I surrender my heart. In the moments alone, I fall apart. In melancholy, they found me tearless. The midnight hour found me fearless. Through waves of regret, I returned to nothing. Deep in reflection, there I stood stunning. A consequence of destiny is how the trepidation, it rests in me. In your arms I sleep and dream of butterflies. Your peace is my relief. Doubt will need some better lies. In your kiss I am tamed and acquiesce defeat. In the throes of your passion, I am complete. So similar to the last poem in the way that the rhymes start guiding the poem forward. And I think it's just really important to, of course, read more contemporary poetry, like someone said, I think it was Rose maybe said earlier. And notice how the poems have much more power when they have specific detail. There's a lot of the writer's sort of base mantra is show, don't tell. And what that means is we create images in a scene in your mind, in the experience of the piece of writing that we get to live inside. We sort of create this world through our words. And you do that by being really specific and really detailed. And it can be just a few small details like we saw in some poems earlier today. But it's those details that bring the poem to life. And then it's being brought to life that lets the emotion be transferred. And when we spend a lot of time labeling and talking about descriptors for what the emotions are, that just doesn't resonate, doesn't connect with people. Because what we're doing is creating this sort of like mental bridge, and you do that with the detail. And so there are parts in this poem that had a little more detail, and the poem started coming to life, and then the rhyme started pulling us toward more generalities that didn't have as much connection. So in the eve of contrition, and at the eve, eve is sort of interesting because we have something we can get a hold of, but then contrition is a generality. I found myself in the eye of the storm. And so if you're going to be in the eye of the storm, go into that eye and show us that eye. Like what is swirling around you in the eye of that storm? And then those things, are there like fish sucked up from the current of the Gulf Stream or something? I mean, who knows? Like, what could be there? Are there like tables and chairs? Is there a woman on a bicycle? Like from, I mean, show us that eye and what the eye looks like and feels like, what's swirling there. Like go into once you have a detail that's like presenting itself to you, like dive into that detail and bring it to life for us. Like focus on the image there. And as we saw in an earlier poem, that's where, like with the moon, and I guess the last poem, that's where this extended metaphor comes in. And we have the Neil Postman Award for Metaphor or something for a reason. Neil Postman said that metaphor isn't a what is that quote? It's not an ornament. It's an organ of perception. They're not something that we write because they're cool. We write because they expand the way we understand and see the world. Like we really make these connections. And this is the sort of fundamental way we understand everything. And so metaphor makes new meaning. That's really what's happening in poems. And so once you start to sort of dive into an image, that image starts to become metaphor, and it becomes something that we understand a little more clearly, and something new can emerge out of that. So dive into the eye storm. Don't just let it pass you by. That's the first thing. Detail, detail, detail. Like dive into those images. And those images create this world. We enter the world like sort of through your breath in poetry. And then we get to experience your experience. And that's how the empathy works. And that's how the emotion is conveyed by entering your breath and becoming you and seeing the world as you see it temporarily. That's the magic of it. And so focus on those details, bring those details to life, and worry about the emotion later. Like you have the emotion in you. But start out, find sort of the voice in the image, and then run with those things and let the emotion come out on their own through those images, and then we'll feel them too. So that is the general advice that you just always give, because that's what show don't tell means. And that's why it's like a mantra for writers, because you show it, you demonstrate it. You don't say how the feeling feels. You make us live it. That's what that means. And so, the poem has the emotion there, but I think it's being guided toward the telling rather than the showing because of the rhymes. Again, you have an idea and your mind sort of generates really quickly that first easy rhyme in the direction you think you're going. And that's not the interesting direction. We want to dive deeper and dig further down into something surprising. So don't follow that first rhyme. So we have, I surrender my heart, in the moments alone I fall apart. Once you say heart, you're sort of already generating that I fall apart. Like that heart apart is like already there. Don't take those roads. Take something different so you can surprise yourself, because otherwise you're just going to keep spinning your wheels in the same place and not actually generating new feeling, And so that's where the core of the poem is the places like the eye of the storm, not the places like falling apart. Anyway, let me read more. We'll start back up here. I still rebelled in conflict and chaos. I could never leave the pain that held me, held no need to grieve, and foggy confusion. So again, foggy is another, like the eye of the storm. For a brief moment, we get an image, and we sort of cling to that. You get more of a emotional kick in that little point, just the fog. That's all it sort of takes, is just something we're desperate for, things to cling to. Like a little life rafts. That's what images are. So anyway, in foggy confusion, I became enlightened. And when love called, I was not silent. Every moment with you, I surrendered my heart. In the moments alone, I fall apart. In melancholy, they found me tearless. The midnight hour found me fearless. Again, the midnight hour is another interesting detail. And those things, when they appear, dive in and explore that. What does it look like in the midnight hour? What's around you? Why tearless? Like dive into that feeling and that through the details. Found me fearless through waves of regret. Again, we get tearless, fearless. That's really pushing the poem into the sort of the known, unsurprising, repetitive direction by following those rhymes. That's what we're talking about. Through waves of regret, I returned nothing, deep in reflection. There I stood stunning. A consequence of destiny is how the trepidation, it rests in me. In your arms I sleep and dream of butterflies. Your peace is my relief. Doubt will need some better lies. In your kiss I am tamed and acquiesce defeat. In the throes of your passion I am complete. And maybe the defeat complete can work as a rhyme, but But anyway, just so dive into the details, and I think give that speech, and it's a good speech. It's a good speech. So try that. Let's see. I'm just going to read some of the comments. Yeah, here's how, because I think people have, one of the wonderful things about this too, is that when we talk, we sort of all feel the same way about these poems. In the chat window, and you all have different ways of saying it. That's really helpful, I think. And so Desi Cochran says, "The pain that held me doesn't help me understand the pain that held you." It's a great way to put it. That's what I mean when we're talking about how labels aren't compelling. They don't create that meaning and that experience where they tell rather than show. That's the exact problem. What Desi says there, the pain that held me is a quote. Doesn't help me understand the pain that held you. But creating a scene, letting us enter that scene, letting us sort of experience your voice as we say the poem, that makes us feel the pain that held you. So I hope you understand that distinction. And Kimberly Gibson Tran says, I wanted to know what the speaker is contrite about, or I want some more clues or to hint at that. Yeah, so it's the details. Don't hold back telling the story. Yeah. And Dick Westheimer says this is so helpful to hear over and over. Be like the fox, don't get predictable, especially to yourself. Yeah, we're trying to surprise ourselves when we write. And that's really that's the joy. I mean, there's not a lot of money in writing, especially... we used to say that there's maybe some writer, if you're a fiction writer or nonfiction writer or something, but nowadays with ChatGPT, there's not even money in that. So there's no money in writing at all, not just poetry. But there is what sustains us, what makes us interesting and keeps us wanting to write, is that feeling of surprising ourselves. And that's what makes us want to read too, because no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader. We love that surprise. We want to think about the world in different ways. And so pushing yourself to say things that you didn't realize you knew or didn't know you had the capacity to say, that's the driving force behind wanting to continue writing poems. So don't take the predictable, easy way. Surprise yourself. Let your soul be open to surprise. And that's really, and you do that by focusing on other things, on those details and on the music, and then letting say stuff that you didn't know you were about to say. Yeah. So Ali Rowan says it's great to write a love letter to someone, but if it's a poem, give it more specificity so that others can appreciate it. Yeah. And that's the same, what we've been talking about. The other thing it adds, so if this poem was written for the person, if you wanted the person you wrote this for, it is Valentine's Day, as it happens. If you want to write a love poem to somebody, it doesn't need to have the kind of bridge, through that, creating a space and connecting that way, because the person is already connected, and you could give a poem like this to somebody and they'd appreciate it. It's just a matter of making strangers feel the feeling, so then we can appreciate it too and go along on that journey that is your life with you. That's the whole point. Let's see. Just looking at some of the more comments, make sure we got them all. Okay. Well, I think that's gonna wrap it up then. Thanks everybody for we do. It's 4 here Central Time. It's 4:22. See if anybody's stopping for Lizzie's Girl Scout cookies. Once again, if you want to buy Lizzie's Girl Scout cookies, feel free. Actually, I got it. Oops, I can't take that. Sorry. Anyway, if you it's gonna wrap up the critique of the week. I gotta see what that is. That was actually maybe an important call. So we're gonna wrap it up now. And glad you were here with me for this critique of the week. It was really fun, as it always is. If you'd like to share, of course, go to reddit.com/critique. You can share your own poems. That'd be really helpful. Now, the prompt on the Rattle Cast this week was to write a poem that includes a memory you've never shared and also includes dialogue. So a memory you've never shared before with some dialogue. That's the prompt for this week. The guest for this week is Todd Robinson. So Todd Robinson's a wonderful Nebraska poet. Should be a really interesting character. Speaking of love poems, it's a great week for that. Mass Shut-In is a kind of love poem book, an alternative kind of love poems. He's going to share some poems from that, some newer poems. He was the poet of the day yesterday on Rattle.com with a daily poem, Year 6 from the winter issue. His most recent book is Mass for Shut-Ins, but he's going to be mostly, like I said, reading new poems. That's this Sunday with Todd Robinson, Rattlecast 281. Your poems about a memory you've never shared before with dialogue. So those two elements, share them in the second half of that show. Sunday, February 16th, the regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope to see you there. Hope you have a great week in the meantime, and we'll talk to you later. Good night.